Some phone calls here and say hello to Matt from over in Lawrence. Matt, welcome to Up to Date.
Hi, hey, I'm listening to the show and with great interest, and something pops into my head that I was told in high school by the nuns who ran our chorus, and that was, when you sing, you pray twice. And when you look at the structure of the word enchantment, or to be a cantor, we begin to see that the very root word means casting a spell. And in fact, Spiel in German, a Spieler is somebody who casts, kind of tells a story about something. And I think that there's tremendous, almost spiritual stuff going on in the choice of these songs. I mean, if I were to say to you, here's a little thought experiment. If I were to say to you, well, the sun rises because I tell it to, or if I say to you, the sun rises because I tell it to, that has a lot more power. The second one does. And so I think that really the reason people, I think, way back, through Abraham Lincoln want to connect with the power of music is because it just, drills deep into the hippocampus and says, this is more true.
Well, Matt, I think you make some great points, and maybe you sound like you're a graduate of this class called Music and Politics at Avila. You did so well there. Hop in the car and come on over to the studio. You can sit down and talk with us here. Great points.
Okay. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Matt. And Stephen, along those lines, you talk about the latent psychological effects of these songs as being perhaps the most important aspect of all this. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I think the idea here is particularly, when Amity and I sat down for this class, we said, this is a broad thing. How are we going to structure this? And propaganda certainly seemed natural. I mean, you can't do a music and politics class without propaganda, and then censorship, because that's important too. And I think what we decided was the most important thing is the fact that music can affect us in ways that our conscious mind doesn't recognize. And so, for instance, if I'm constantly listening to songs throughout my life that are about romance, and they're all about male and female romance, that heterosexual love becomes normalized, and anything else becomes sort of other, and it's no wonder that we then start to reject those types of relationships around us. And so, and that's just one example. But the idea here is that our subconscious does a lot of the work for us. It does work with regard to gender, with regard to race, with regard to all the things that we know in our conscious that we don't want to discriminate on the basis of, or have negative thoughts on the basis of. But yet our culture is surrounded by negative messages, including in our music. Not just popular music, but in refined music throughout history. And so those types of things can allow us to process information that's in line with those predispositions without allowing our conscious mind to suppress that.
And
so it's a very important effect.
And so therefore the power of lyrics can be pretty potent in these campaign songs, Stephen. That's what you're saying here,
tremendously
right?
So, although, the latent effects generally don't come sort of as a one-shot thing. They sort of come as a cumulative effect over time. And so we want to be careful not to overstate, being exposed to a certain campaign song for a period of time. It turns you into somebody who's very much engaged in the campaign. I mean, there's certainly some of that going on in terms of the visceral reaction. But really, for something to hook onto our subconscious and then affect later either our consciousness or our behaviors, it's got to take place, over a longer stretch of time. It's not like an injection with a hypodermic.
Well, you wonder if the lyrics to these campaign songs, Amity, were more important back in the day, in Lincoln's time and Martin Van Buren's time, of all people, than they are today, just because the lyrics seem to matter and people there were distinct messages being sent tailored to the candidates involved, right?
Well, it's very interesting when you think about the lyrics. I tend to put the lyrics under the subject of propaganda. And certainly with the older, the folk nature and the idea of some of those earlier pieces, the words, everybody understood every word and you could hear it, and that propaganda was very enticing. And Stephen's exactly right. When things happen over a very long period of time, there's that latent level.
It works on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And with campaign songs, you need to hit them in the moment and grab them fast. And that idea of propaganda, those lyrics, although it's not blatant political propaganda, Johnny Be Good many people would say has nothing political about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that those lyrics are as political as anything else. John McCain wants to be seen as the good guy. Come on, what he went through in the middle of Vietnam kind of makes him come out on that good guy side in what is perceived historically as a bad situation, and I'm understating that. But you look at the current climate, and Johnny Be Good, that can be as political as, well, as the folk nature and some of the blatant propaganda.
So you think the lyrics are every bit as important today as they used to be?
They may not be as openly political, but I think propaganda doesn't have to be blatant.
Okay. Back to some phone calls here, and let's say hi to Brent from Kansas City, Missouri. Brent, you're on Up to Date.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Brent.
I think this is the lamest bunch of campaign songs that I've heard come along in a long time. I can't tell me why no candidate has picked The Times They Are A-Changin' by Bob Dylan. I'll take my answer off the air. Thanks.
Well, that's a great point, because the word change is obviously the operative word in this campaign, Stephen, and we're not hearing the word change in these songs.
No, we're not, and I think that the caller has a nice point about the Bob Dylan song. I think that there's probably relationships that people have, especially the baby boomers, with that song, some that would make it very effective and some that would actually make it pretty controversial. In fact, I think that, the importance here is, of course, to get independent voters. The Democratic people are going to vote for Democrats. Republicans will vote for Republicans. But even in the primaries, there's independent voters that can vote in open primary states. And certainly when it gets to the general election, you want independent voters. And so you try to pick songs that are non-controversial. Now, to most of us, or to many of us, The Times They Are A-Changin' is non-controversial. But for a lot of people, Bob Dylan symbolizes, a point in the subculture where the left was pretty powerful. And again, that's a very positive thing for lots of folks. And it's a neutral thing for others, but I think it's a negative for some others. Now, maybe it would only turn off the people that wouldn't vote for one of those candidates anyway. I think it would be hard for Mitt Romney to use that song, for instance, although his whole campaign now has become about change after Iowa. You see change signs all over the place. So, but there's not a lot of others. I was thinking about David Bowie in Changes, but I mean, once again, you don't have the same kind of beat. You don't have, and the message really isn't on point. It's really a personal song as opposed to something that's more widely, that can bring people in, rather.
And Amity, the Dylan song doesn't have any pep or energy to it. Right. It's kind of a forlorn kind of sounding song.
Yeah,
because Dylan sounds, he is kind of forlorn.
Exactly. And you think about the lyrics of all of these songs, and certainly when Stephen Caliendo and I taught the class, there was an element of the students would say, well, if there aren't lyrics, it can't be political. This idea that it is in that blatant verbiage. And so as a musician, my opinion is that music can be equally political with no lyrics whatsoever.
That's one of your points here, that some of the old classical composers had songs with no lyrics, and they were pretty powerful.
Absolutely. One of the most politically viewed composers in his time was Beethoven, and many of his works have no words whatsoever. And in the 80s, when the Berlin Wall fell, it was Beethoven's symphonies that were played in multiple venues across Germany. And so you look at our American students in the late 20th century said, how can Beethoven be political? But he really can, and a lot of it is the rise of the pitch, the movement of the rhythm, the beat of where that beat falls on within a measure. I mean, musicians can take and analyze this at a whole different level. And I think as much as Bob Dylan's song absolutely has a lot of memories and a lot of issues tied in with it, the beat doesn't do what it needs to do to move people.
Well, do we know from Beethoven's own diaries or whatever, was he writing in a way that was intended to be political at times?
Yes, at times he absolutely was, and at times he was disenfranchised with what was going on. His third symphony, which eventually was titled Eroica, when he wrote that, he actually wrote it in honor of Napoleon. And because of some of Napoleon's choices on the battlefield and for us in a political venue, he changed the title because he was so angry with Napoleon and his choices in trying to be the conqueror and trying to really be so authoritative and so
and his music
controlling.
Reflected that, I gather.
Exactly. And so the beat of the piece and the movement and the way, even the key he chose, he reflects on the key of E-flat as being something very important to him. And pieces that, there are several Beethoven pieces that come back to E-flat. For Mozart, it was D minor, but, we can go on and on.